In this tutorial, we are going to focus on creating objectives for a lesson plan. Now think about an objective as a goal. What do you want your students to accomplish by the end of that one lesson plan? So I'm only talking about those 45 minutes or that hour, hour and a half. What will your students be able to accomplish by the end of that time frame? I want you to think about your objectives kind of like you would a GPS, right? Where you know where you're starting and you know where you're going to end up. If you don't know where you're going to end up, chances are if you just get in the car and start driving, you're not going to land anywhere near where you want to go, right? So with objectives, if you have a clear path in mind, you know exactly where you want to end. It's going to help the process of creating and structuring your lesson significantly. Within an objective, you want a few different things. You want them to be learner-centered, practical, measurable, clear and specific. So how do we do that? First, let's take learner-centered. This simply means that you're focusing on the students, not on yourself. Okay, so what are your students going to be able to accomplish? That's why when you write out each of your objectives, this is the phrase that you're going to use before each of them. By the end of this lesson, and some people will use this abbreviation, SWBAT, it stands for students will be able to. Okay, so your objectives will look something like this. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to write 10 sentences in the future simple tense, and then you can continue on with those bullet points. But this needs to be included. Second, it needs to be practical. So your objective needs to be something that your students are actually able to accomplish by the end of your lesson. Take this one for example. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to use grammar correctly. Would this suffice as an objective? No. Why? Because can you really say by the end of your lesson, by the end of that 45 minutes or that hour and a half, students are able to use all grammar correctly? Do you see how this is incredibly general when I say they're able to use grammar? So that means, okay, they can use their present perfect, their past perfect progressive, etc., etc., etc. Everything they write and everything they say is going to be correct in terms of grammar. Is that true? Is that possible? No, it's not possible. So when I say practical, I mean that it has to be something they can actually succeed in doing based on your specific lesson. So for example, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to write 10 sentences using the future simple tense. Okay, that's possible, right? If you taught a lesson on future simple tense, depending on the level of the learner, they should be able to write 10 sentences using it. That is a practical objective. Measurable. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to know the present simple tense. So take a look at this verb here, to know. Is it possible to measure if students know the present simple tense? No, it's not possible. There are different ways you can check if they understand, but if I were to just look out at my students and say, oh yes, they know, they get it, but how? How do you measure that? If I just say they know, there's no form of measurement there. I can't prove that they actually know the present simple tense. Okay. So you want to use action verbs, and you've probably seen this before, but this is what you want to be using. You want to be incorporating Bloom's taxonomy into your objectives. Okay. These verbs are created to help you measure an objective. So let's go through a few examples. Identify. Students will be able to identify all family members in their personal photo. Can you measure that? Yes, because if a student is looking at a photo and they're able to say, this is my mom, this is my dad, that's my grandma, that's my aunt, if they're able to identify all those family members, they have completed that assignment. They've accomplished it, right? You can say, oh, they got 2 wrong, they got 5 wrong, but this is something that you can measure. Let's take another one. Translate. Students will be able to translate all 10 vocabulary words into their native language. So that's something that I can see. Were they able to do it or weren't they? Okay, I can measure their ability to accomplish a task. Construct. Students will be able to construct a survey about the possibilities of global warming using the modal verbs will, can, might, won't. Okay, so they're either able to construct that survey or they're not. Explain. Students will be able to explain the differences between two images using comparative adjectives. So here again, I can measure their ability to accomplish that task. And lastly, be clear and specific. So you can follow this format. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to use your measurable action verb, answer the what, answer the how. For example, students will be able to describe their family members to the class using a PowerPoint with at least 3 real images. So I start by students will be able to measurable action verb, describe what, they're describing their family members and how they're using PowerPoint, and they're incorporating images into it. Okay, so it's clear, it's specific. Another example of being very specific was when I used this objective. I didn't even just say that they can construct a survey using their modal verbs. I identified the modal verbs that they needed to incorporate within that survey. Another example could be, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to write a 5 to 7 sentence introduction paragraph with a clear hook, connecting information, and thesis. Again, I'm very clear with my objective and I'm very specific. 5 to 7 sentences. I also am saying what I want in that introduction paragraph, what I'm looking for specifically.